YouTube, what is good? Yo, I kind of like the way this setup looks without the colored lights. Let me know in the comments your thoughts. I'm gonna keep it with the standard look for now, but I kind of like that. Today, we are talking about editing street photos, specifically how I edit my street photos. Now, this is a video I've wanted to make for a while. It's kind of a complicated video to make. There's no real specific recipe to me editing my photos. It's different every single time. So today, rather than just sitting here droning on editing one photo, I want to explain all the different ingredients that go into my edits. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take a bunch of photos from my Instagram and explain like the critical piece of each edit, what the main ingredient is, and then at the end of the video, you'll have all these different ingredients and can do the same thing as me, put them all into a photo in different ways to get the desired result. So let's just jump right into it. Before we get going, do me a solid. If you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up button. And if I, for some reason, leave something out, you're like, yo, there's something I do that people should know about, feel free to drop it in the comments so people can go down there, read, and learn further. Anyways though, the first thing I do with every single edit is my basic adjustments, which is essentially, contrast, exposure, highlights, shadows, black, whites, clarity, saturation, and vibrance. Like that main basic adjustment module in Lightroom. Now, one thing I like to do in those basic adjustments is drop my contrast dramatically at the start of the edit. It just gives kind of a flatter look to the photo, and then at the end, bring all that general contrast back in. I think a general contrast adjustment can really change everything in your photo. So for me, it helps to start with a little bit more of a flat image, adjust my shadows and highlights, blacks and whites accordingly, and then move that general contrast back up to give the photo like its final punch. That's just something I like to do. Another thing that I like to do from photo to photo is bring my clarity down into the negatives. Now, with digital cameras, with how sharp they are, all the detail you can get, different lenses. For example, my Sigma 35mm 1.4 is an extremely sharp and extremely contrasty lens, and sometimes I don't want all that in my image. So what I do to counteract this is bring my clarity down just slightly to add a little bit of diffusion, a little bit less clarity to the photo. Now, I'm not going crazy, making my photo look blurry or anything like that, but just a small adjustment to add a slight diffusion to the light in the image and bring a more dreamy look about. I did that with this photo right here, and I think it helps the image quite a bit. It added to the total feel of the photo. Now, this next photo right here utilizes a radial filter or a circle filter. Essentially how this works is you can click the radial adjustment tool in Lightroom. It's like a little circle. You can draw a circle or an oval anywhere in your photo, and then you can make adjustments that only affect areas outside the drawn circle. So for this example right here, I knew I was going to use this effect immediately when I shot this photo because of the way the lighting was. We had this natural circle light essentially where the light post is creating the main light in the photo, and then there's a shadow above and below it. So I used a radial filter to dramatically increase this effect even more in post-processing to really draw your eye into the center towards this mysterious subject we have behind the pole. That is one great thing about radial filters like this. You can select any point in your photo and then create a light adjustment around it to really draw your eye into that point that you want to focus on. That's one main reason I enjoy them so much. They're especially useful. Now, this next example, however, a radial filter would not be good because I don't want to affect the top of the image. I really like the way the trees look. I think they're perfect the way they are. But I do want to add some shadow in the lower half of the image to really bring your eye into the middle where we have our subject, and you can see it's almost already a natural radial filter because we have that light on the ground. So for this, I'm going to use a graduated filter, which essentially does the same thing as a radial filter where you're selecting a certain area of the photo you want to change, you want to make an adjustment to, but it works differently. Essentially, what you're going to do is click the graduated filter tool up in the top right corner of Lightroom. You're going to drag this filter onto your scene, and it's going to affect wherever you drag. Now, for these graduated filters, I like to click the show filter button or whatever it says down there so you can see what areas of the photo are going to be affected by it, but you can drag this as high onto the photo or as low onto the photo as you want, and then whatever area is highlighted by the filter, you can make an adjustment to. So for this photo, we're going to drag that graduated filter onto the bottom of our image. We're going to drop our shadows a little bit, drop maybe our exposure a little bit to darken up that foreground, really bringing your eye eye into the middle of the photo. I love graduated filters because they allow you to dramatically manipulate light in your photo, whether that's taking light out of a certain piece of a photo or adding light into a certain piece of the photo. And there's so much customization you can use. It can really add to the drama you feel with an image. This is another example of graduated filters, but in the reverse. Instead of darkening a part of the image, we're going to lighten a part of the image. So this photo is one that I made, and I intentionally kept these white borders from this wall in the top and bottom of the photo to frame our scene. But once I got done editing the photo, these white walls weren't really punching as much as they could. They weren't creating the amount of contrast that I wanted them to have when I originally made the photo. So what we're going to do is drag a graduated filter on the top, a graduated filter on the bottom, bring the highlights up to create more contrast and really bring your eye into the middle of the image. So this is the exact opposite of the previous example. The last example, we darkened a part of the photo to bring your eye into the center. This is the flipped version where we're lightening up the corners to really draw your eye into the darker, more contrasty center. This example right here is a great example of basically every single thing in this video coming together on one photo. Now the next thing we're talking about is the brush tool. So this happens a lot during editing. You make a basic general adjustment to the photo. You drop your highlights, you bring up your shadows, whatever the case may be. And it could be that 90% of the photo is positively affected by this adjustment, but that adjustment could be negatively impacting a small part of your image and actually taking away from the overall feel of the photo. That's exactly what is happening in this photo right here. I made a bunch of adjustments, and right before the photo was complete, I started thinking, you know, these lights on the right side of the photo, they're just not coming through the way they were when I started the edit. Something I did along the way must be negatively impacting them. So rather than going into Photoshop and doing a bunch of layers there, which is something you can do, so in this case, I'm going to grab that brush, bring my highlights up, and just paint over these areas right here to get them back to the point that I want. This is something I always look out for in my photos. As you're going through all these different steps of editing, you need to pay attention to areas that might be negatively impacted by an adjustment you made that positively impacts a large piece of your photo, and pay attention to those details. This is a prime example of that. Now this photo right here utilizes the clone stamp tool. Every photo in today's video utilizes this step of editing, and that is removing distractions from our photo. This photo right here, there was all this lettering on this marquee sign. Because it's a long exposure, I knew this sign was going to be very bright, almost blown out. But some of the letters were coming through the sign. It didn't look very good. They weren't clear, but they were still there. It just looked messy. So I went in with the clone stamp tool. I drew over the areas I wanted to remove and slowly removed each one of these letters from the photo. This is a very time-consuming thing. It's a little bit tedious. Occasionally, Lightroom makes a bad selection, even though a lot of the time they get it right and you don't have to adjust it. But occasionally you do have to manually adjust the selection it makes on the clone stamp, and it just takes a while, but it can dramatically impact your photo. It takes away a lot of distraction. It cleans it up. It's a step that I never skip. If you see a photo on my Instagram, it has been combed over and all the distractions have been removed, and the clone stamp tool is a great way to do that. Now this next example is about colors. Now in Lightroom, we all know you can go down to the color sliders, you can slide them back and forth and make adjustments, but oftentimes I find myself wanting to change the color of only certain parts of a photo. So in this photo, I want to bring up the orange color of the water droplets on my lens, but when I make an orange adjustment in Lightroom, when I bring up the saturation, it also affects this marquee sign, which I don't want to happen. I think the colors on there look good. I just want to add a little bit more pop to these interesting light reflection, like bokeh marks that we're getting in the photo. So what I'm going to do is open this image up in Photoshop. I'm going to right click, edit in Photoshop. This is a super simple Photoshop step. Go into Photoshop. I'm going to click on hue/saturation to create a new layer. Going to make some adjustments to the color in there, but here is the key. I'm going to go select my brush tool, click on black, and paint over the areas in the photo that I don't want to be affected by this adjustment. So I'm going to paint over the marquee sign so that goes back to the original look, but now these water droplets will have a little bit more color. This is my way of customizing the colors in the photo, really selecting where I want them to go. There's a lot of different things you can do. Everybody has their own method. This is just the one I use. I like the Photoshop way of doing it because my photos always end in Photoshop, so I can add a white border. If you've been to my Instagram or any of my social media, I like adding a border to my photo. So let me tell you how I do that real fast. I go into Photoshop, click Image, canvas size, then I go to percent, and I always use the same percent. So let's say you want your border to be 105% of the image. You would do that every single time, and your border is always going to be the exact same size regardless of the photo. So all my photos end in Photoshop, so making color adjustments in Photoshop at the end of an edit is usually like the last step if I'm gonna do that before I add the border. So honestly, that is it. That's all the ingredients. That's everything that I do to edit and create the street photos that you see on my social media, the street photos you see in my vlogs. Take all this information, apply it to what you are doing. Y'all know I can't tell you exactly how to do anything. You know, editing, photography, it's all situational. It can vary from photo to photo, and that's what happens with my images, and I'm sure it will happen with yours. So I hope this helped you out and gave you some insight into how I edit my photos. If you enjoyed this one, like I said, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button for more photography videos. I'm gonna get out of here, enjoy my weekend. Y'all do the same, and I will see you next time.